Welcome to this flipped recording on Unit 1, Lesson 13, Alexander the Great. As we are getting started with this flip recording, I just wanted to go over a tip of the week, and that is on taking notes. Taking notes is very beneficial, and I highly encourage you to take notes on your lessons this semester. So 5 of the benefits of taking notes that is on the image on the left-hand side of your screen. I know it's a little bit blurry, but 5 of the benefits of taking notes is that number 1, it helps you to improve your focus. So as you're reading, you can really focus on the material as you are taking notes. Number 2, it helps you to stay alert. So you don't get to the end of the lesson and think, what did I even just read about? Number 3, it encourages you to engage in active learning. It makes you kind of ask questions as you're going and writing that down. You kind of have to think through what you're writing down and what you're reading and learning. Number 4, it enhances your comprehension, so you'll better understand the material after you've taken notes over it. And number 5, it creates study material, which is going to be really important when you get to the end of the semester and we have a semester exam. You can go back and review all the notes on each unit that you've taken. An additional benefit is that I have provided you the opportunity for extra credit for uploading your notes. So I encourage you to, as you get started with each unit, go to the content in your history course, and you will see it'll list all the content, and you'll see an extra credit folder. Click on that extra credit folder, and you'll see Submit Unit 1 Notes for Extra Credit. So as you're getting started with Unit 1, go ahead and click on that, and there's a link to the notes guide for Unit 1. You can click that, print it out, and then take lessons over each of the lessons as you go through that. It'll have like an outline for each lesson that you can use to guide you as you're taking those notes. At the end of the unit, come back, upload your notes here, and you will receive extra credit, which is just an additional benefit to taking notes. And with that said, let's jump right into Unit 9 and talk about Alexander the Great. So our objectives for this lesson, we want to identify who Alexander the Great was. We want to locate on a map the areas that he conquered and explain how his actions and conquest changed the world. So that's kind of our goal here as we get started with this lesson. So when someone is called the Great, what does it mean? Would you have given Alexander that epithet? If so, how would you explain that he was great? How did his personality, his policies, and his conquest affect his empire around the world? So think about all of this as you create some Alexander the Great trading cards. Don't forget to click on those lesson resources as you start. That's going to open up your student guide to help guide you through the lesson. But it's important that you think about this as you go through the lesson is, how would you explain that Alexander the Great was in fact great? If you take kind of that position, how would you defend that? So let's talk a little bit about Alexander the Great. Even as a child, he knew that he wanted to conquer the world. By the time he was 20, he was well educated. Aristotle, in fact, was his teacher. And Alexander was a brilliant general by the age of 20. And he was certain that he could do anything that he set his mind to. Would he live up to these expectations, his own expectations? You're going to follow the directions in the student guide that you just opened up to find out. The first thing that it asks us to do in that student guide is to read chapter 4, starting with the heading Alexander the Great until the end. So you're going to be reading pages 336 to 339. And then you're going to go back online to complete a map and an online activity. So I definitely want you to read those pages on your own. But as we go over some of the highlights that we learn as we read, we learn that Alexander learned under Aristotle for 3 years. He taught Alexander a love for Greek culture. And we learn that Aristotle actually, in the reading right before, so in the previous reading, we learn that Aristotle decided to leave Athens because he knew what had happened to Socrates. Socrates had enemies, and like Socrates, Aristotle had enemies, and so eventually they charged him with a lack of reverence for the gods. So Aristotle decided to leave Athens. He leaves Athens, and then we learn that a year later he died. But Alexander learned under Aristotle for 3 years, which really embedded in him that love for Greek culture. Alexander's dad, Philip, so Philip has a son, names him Alexander, and there was never any doubt that this boy was going to follow in his father's footsteps. It is said that as a child, Alexander burst into tears because he was worried that Philip would not leave him any land to conquer. So Philip was murdered in 336 BC by one of his own officers, and Alexander became king at the age of 20. So as you read, you're going to learn something that Alexander carried around with him for inspiration. So make sure you take note of that. One thing that we learn is that Alexander was ambitious to a fault. He thought that he could accomplish anything, and so we kind of get a glimpse of that and of his determination and his pride in the famous story of the Gordian Knot. And it said that early in his career, Alexander came to a town in Asia Minor named Gordium, and there he saw something quite strange. A huge, complicated knot of a rope, and there was an ancient prophecy that said whoever managed to unravel it would rule all of Asia. So Alexander looks at the knot, raises his sword, and slices through the knot, and then he says, "Thus I cut all Gordian knots," he declared. So that was his way of unraveling the knot. Alexander did prove to be a brilliant general, and you've got a map on page 339. His army was sweeping across Asia. He conquered the Persian Empire, Mesopotamia. He overtook Egypt, and then he marched over the Hindu Kush Mountains to the banks of the Indus. And his conquest stretched over 1 million square miles, the largest empire the world had known. And he founded more than 70 cities, and guess who he named those cities after? He named them after himself. So Alexandria, Egypt would become one of those most important cities. So we also learn through our reading that while he had a love for Greek culture, he also had a love of Persian culture. As he is conquering these cities and experiencing cultures, he showed a great love of Persian culture by adopting Eastern customs into his personal life, such as he dressed in long, flowing Persian robes, he married a Persian princess, he arranged for 80 of his officers to marry Persian women at a huge wedding ceremony. He adopted the Persian tradition of making his officers lie on the ground before him when they made requests. You can imagine that some of his officers may have started to get frustrated with Alexander. So finally, after years of fighting, Alexander's weary men refused to go on. They had conquered so many lands, and reluctantly, Alexander decided to listen. They start back home. In 323 BC, after a night of heavy drinking, he contracted fever and died in Babylon in a soldier's tent. He was 32 years old, so he had been king for only 13 years. And then on the last page of your reading, on 339, you're going to read the Hellenistic Age. And so after his death, Alexander's empire begins to fall apart. In the coming years, the military might of the Greeks became only a memory, but Alexander's conquest did much to change a large part of the world. Greek settlers immigrated to the cities that Alexander had founded, and Greek traders traveled far and wide. They took with them the Greek language and ideas. Greek laws, architecture, and art spread through Asia and North Africa, and so did Greek science and philosophy. At the same time, many Eastern ideas spread to Europe, so Alexander's campaigns had opened the eyes of the Greeks to whole new worlds. So not only did he take Greek culture to them, he brought back Eastern customs to the Greeks. Just as Alexander had mixed Greek and Persian customs in his personal life, the people of Greece, Asia, and North Africa began to absorb parts of each other's cultures. Never before had ideas and traditions traveled so much. We call this time when Greek and Eastern cultures mixed the Hellenistic age. It lasted for about 300 years. So after Alexander's death in 323 BC, the term Hellenistic comes from the word Hellenes, the Greeks' own name for themselves. So during the Hellenistic age, Greek civilization became the common bond throughout much of the world surrounding the Mediterranean Sea. And so we're going to continue to see the lofty ideas of the Greeks and how they're going to deeply influence other empires in the ages to come. So that's kind of a brief overview of Alexander the Great. And so I will see you on the flip side. So look in your flip follow-up sessions for a class connect. Attend that live session. We'll carry this topic into further practice. You can also attend help lab sessions for extra support. Have fun, and I will see you on the flip side.